There are some political and military conflicts in the modern world that span over decades without a clear solution. The Israel and Palestine conflict is something like that, dated back to the end of the 19th century and is still ongoing. The peak point of the conflict was observed in the mid-20th century, after creating a separate state called Israel, within the old territories of Palestine in 1947. Until that, it was the only conflict between Jewish and Arabic people over the ownership of their lands, and after establishing a state, the conflict was turned into a conflict between two states called Israel and Palestine. Throughout history, several steps have been taken to solve this dispute between these two neighboring states as a part of the Israeli-Palestinian peace process, but none of them become successful to settle the problem permanently. So this video is dedicated to understanding Israeli-Palestinian problem in detail. Initially, both Arabic people and Jewish people shared the same land areas without a big issue, and everything started to turn upside down with the birth of nationalist movements among Jews and Arabs in the late 19th century. But after the Balfour Declaration of 1917, which publicly announced the British government's support towards the establishment of a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine, the collision between these two movements intensified. One such collision is the fight in the southern Levant upon the emergence of Palestinian nationalism at the end of the Franco-Syrian War in the 1920s. Later, several conflicts happened between Palestinian Arabs and Jewish Yishuv in the 1930s and 1940s during the British rule in Mandatory Palestine. Under the leadership of Haj Amin al-Husseini, started the national movement of establishing a home for the Palestine-Arabian people and highlighted the Jewish national movement and Jewish immigration to Palestine as the sole enemy to his cause. Under his leadership, large-scale riots were organized against the Jewish people in 1920 in Jerusalem and in 1921 in Jaffa. The result of these riots was the establishment of the Jewish paramilitary force called Haganah. A series of anti-Jewish riots organized in 1929 caused heavy Jewish casualties in the cities like Hebron and Safed, and the evacuation of Jews from Hebron and Gaza. When the situation became more critical, more and more Arab nationalist militants from different parts of the Middle East started to migrate into the territories of Mandatory Palestine. With the support of these migrated militants, the Black Hand militant group was establishing the background for the 1936 Arab Revolt. However, this Arab revolt was repressed after 3 years of continuous fighting by the Jewish forces like Jewish Settlement Police, the Jewish Supernumerary Police, and Special Night Squads, which got the direct assistance of the British government. The background for the separation of Palestine into two separate states was set up for the first time under the Peel Commission, which was introduced after the Arabian Revolt of 1936. But the recommendations made by the Peel Commission was not executed properly due to the disagreements between Jewish leaders. So the violence began again and continued until the beginning of World War II. This situation came to an end, recording more than 5,000 casualties, and more damage was experienced by the Arabian people. With the insecure situation created all around the globe with Hitler's Nazi administration, the situation within Palestine calmed down for a considerable time period. Just after the war, Holocaust survivors from Europe started to migrate towards Palestine in large numbers, and this led to the renewed tension between the Yishuv and Palestinian Arab leadership. In order to control immigration, the British administration decided to introduce immigration quotas. But it was not a practical solution, as both illegal immigration and Zionist insurgency against the British were increasing. As the final solution, the United Nations decided to separate the Palestine into two separate states, as Arab state and Jewish state, under the Resolution 181. A few hours after taking this controversial decision, violence spread throughout Palestine like a wildfire. Arabic people formed a volunteer-based Arab Liberation Army, with the support of the Arab League, to join with the Army of Holy War, which was fighting in Palestine under the leadership of Abd al-Qadir al-Husseini and Hassan Salama. Resistance against those Arabian attacks was provided by the Jewish fighting units like Haganah, Irgun, and Lehi, which are composed of local and foreign Jewish volunteer fighters and Jewish veterans of World War II. By the spring of 1948, Jewish forces were able to capture more power within Palestine territories, creating a heavy refugee problem of Palestine Arabs who fled away from their homelands due to the attacks of Israeli people. So, the official statement regarding the establishment of a new state called Israel was officially declared on the 14th of May 1948, terminating the British mandate that existed. However, the boundaries of this newly established Israel were not clearly announced. Arab League was unhappy about the decision and sent their troops to capture the old territories of British Palestine, starting in the 1948 Arab-Israeli War. After heavy fighting over a year which caused around thousands of casualties, two parties agreed for ceasefire and armistice agreements of 1949. At that moment, Gaza Strip occupied by Egypt and East Jerusalem and the West Bank regions occupied by Jordan were set as the unofficial territories belonging to the All-Palestine government. However, the neighboring Arab states were not ready to accept the identity of Israel as an official state, and its borders remain unsettled. Even after declaring the ceasefire, Palestinian Fedayeen militants started the cross-border operations with the support of Egypt and Jordan. As a response to these unethical attacks, Israel started the reprisal operations which caused considerable damage to the All-Palestine government. During the 1956 Suez Canal crisis, which started with the objectives of regaining the power of the Suez Canal back to the hands of Western powers and removing Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser, who nationalized the foreign-owned Suez Canal Company that had the ownership of the canal. During that crisis period, Israeli forces captured the whole Gaza Strip, removing the All-Palestine government from power. But after the withdrawal of the Israeli forces, the previous government was restored. Due to the disputes between two parties, the Egypt government decided to abandon the All-Palestini government in 1959, and the Gaza Strip officially merged into the United Arab Republic, existed during that era. But 5 years later, a new organization called the Palestinian Liberal Organization, or PLO, was established under the leadership of Yasser Arafat. But this time, administrative body was based in the West Bank region, and it was able to win a seat in the Arab League as well. In 1967, the conflict reached a peak state again, and the Six-Day War was started against Palestinian nationalism. This time, Israel made heavy attacks capturing the power of regions like the Sinai Peninsula, the Gaza Strip, the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and most of the Syrian Golan Heights, tripling the size of the territory that they owned. They were able to annex both East Jerusalem and Golan Heights effectively into their borders, declaring Jerusalem as the Israeli capital. But this annexation was not accepted by most of the international community. During this war, Yasser Arafat and his PLO had to settle within Jordan territories, and many Palestinian fighters joined with the Jordan army in the War of Attrition, which included the Battle of Karama. But that friendship was ruined when the Jordanian-Palestinian Civil War started in 1970. So PLO had to change its base towards South Lebanon, after a heavy defeat against the Jordanian armed force. Jordan forces captured a considerable portion of the PLO-governed area in Palestine and declared it as Fatah land, which was under its control. However, PLO continued their attacks towards North Israel from their new base in South Lebanon, developing the anger of Israel. After the 1978 Coastal Road Massacre, which took the life of 38 innocent Israeli citizens, the Jewish government decided to launch a full-scale invasion which was known as Operation Litani. Israeli forces invaded South Lebanon up to the Litani River with the aim of attacking PLO. After killing more than 1,000 Palestinian fighters, Israeli forces withdrew from Lebanon. When the Lebanese border of Israel was in a war, they were able to develop a friendship with their neighbor and former enemy, Egypt. For the first time in history, Israel formalized its land borders in 1979. This time, the Jewish state had a very calm approach to the problem and properly set the borders with Egypt. Israel withdrew its forces from the Sinai Peninsula in 1982, and in return, Egypt formally recognized Israel as a state, becoming the first Arabian nation to do so. Even though they settled the problem with Egypt, other boundaries were outlined by the 1949 ceasefire line at that moment in an unsettled manner. In 1982, Israel invaded South Lebanon again after attacking one of the Israeli diplomats by Palestinians. This time, Israel got the support of fighters from Maronite allies and the self-styled Free Lebanon State as well. PLO experienced a heavy defeat again and decided to relocate its base to Tripoli. Israel was able to install a pro-Israeli Christian government led by President Bachar Gemayel after expelling the Syrian influence on the Lebanon administrative structure. So, the basic plans were prepared for the peace treaty between Lebanon and Israel under the new government as well. Unfortunately, President Gemayel was assassinated within a brief period, and the peace treaty became something unlikely to happen. However, after signing the 17th of May agreement, Israeli forces started to withdraw from most of Lebanon. Then, War of the Camps broke out between Lebanese factions, the remains of the PLO and Syrian forces. However, when it was 1990, Syrian forces were able to create complete dominance over Lebanon. The dispute which developed between PLO and the Jordanian government opened the opportunity for Israel to develop a friendly relationship with Jordan as well. So, both countries accepted the 1949 armistice line as Israel's de facto northern border. settling their decades-long border issue in 1994. Following the path of Egypt, Jordan became the second Arabian nation to accept Israel as a state. However, its border issues with Syria and Lebanon remained unsettled even when they stepped into the 21st century. For the first time in history, leaders of PLO and Israel expressed their interest towards finding a peaceful solution to the problem. So the Oslo Accords of 1993 were finalized as the basic framework for future Israel-Palestinian relations. But everything derailed with the assassination of the fifth Prime Minister of Israel, Yitzhak Rabin, in 1995. However, the assassination was carried out by an Israeli ultra-nationalist named Yigal Amir. Then, one more attempt to start the peace talk between Israeli and Palestinian leaders was set under the intervention of U.S. President Bill Clinton in 2000, and this peace talk was known as the Camp David Summit. However, Yasser Arafat or Ehud Barak couldn't come to an acceptable solution as there were considerable disagreements between the demands made by each group. Even though the summit failed, small peace talks were held between the two parties continuously. President Clinton came with a new administrative structure which gave a clear identity to Palestine as a state, and it became the base for the Taba summit held in Taba, Egypt in January 2001. Even though talks showed some positive signs from both the parties, power change happened within Israel resulted to end these peace talks as well. One more peace proposal, known as Roadmap for Peace, was presented through the intervention of the European Union, Russia, and the United States in 2002. However, it didn't try to resolve the complex issues like the fate of Jerusalem or Israeli settlements in its first attempt, and left for the later stages. But the talks didn't move beyond the first phase. The Saudi initiative was proposed by Crown Prince Abdullah of Saudi Arabia at the Beirut Summit, held in 2002 with the aim of ending the Arab-Israeli conflict. Even though this was favored by Palestinian leaders, no interest was shown by the Israeli leaders, as it rejected the acceptance of borders before the 1967 Six-Day War. Since then, Israeli prime ministers like Ehud Olmert and Benjamin Netanyahu showed some interest to settle the border problem with Israel, but it never happened practically. So this decades-long Israel-Palestine border problem is continuing without any progress after a number of peace talks attempts. Without any formal boundaries, both Jewish and Arabic people are living in controversial areas like West Bank, Gaza, and East Jerusalem, and we can't see any end to this problem in near future as well. What do you think about the future of the Israel-Palestine conflict? Share your thoughts in the comment section below.